I think that was me when I was about 2.
Debbie was born a girl, assigned female at birth, and lived most of her life this way.
I remember that jumper and I hated it.
But at the age of 44, almost 2 decades ago, she sought help to transition from a woman to a man.
That is me, about 3 years in.
So that's you there 3 years after taking...
Starting the testosterone.
She explains why she started on this path.
I just happened to turn the TV on at the right time and Kilroy was on. And he was basically talking to female-to-male transgender people. And it was like a eureka. This is me. This is what I've got to do.
What did you think changing gender would achieve?
Well, I would become a different person. I'd become accepted in the world.
People who identify as a different gender to the one they're assigned at birth may transition in different ways. Some do socially, using a different name or pronoun, or changing the way they dress. Others may do medically, taking cross-sex hormones, estrogen or testosterone, and others may opt for surgery. We don't know how many people in the UK follow these different pathways. You've still got these. Debbie underwent a full female-to-male surgical transition, even having a penis constructed from skin on her forearm. But after multiple procedures, changing her name to Lee, and 17 years on testosterone, Debbie now deeply regrets what has happened. She's decided to detransition, go back to living as the gender she was assigned at birth.
I remember breaking down. It was like, this was a mistake. It should never have happened. But it was like, what the hell do you do about it? You know, how do you go through yet another harrowing transition? What do you do? I've got no hair, I've got a beard, I've had all my body mutilated. How the hell do I go back to being the Debbie that I was?
Debbie's circumstances are extreme, but she's not alone in changing her mind about identifying as transgender. Charlie Evans struggled with her gender identity from a young age. At 15, she started to identify as a boy, shaving her head, binding her breasts, and using male pronouns. She never took testosterone though, and after several years, decided to go back to identifying as a woman.
There are few studies behind detransition rates, but I can tell you that there are thousands of us.
This year, she went public with a story for the first time at a gay pride rally. She went on to set up a support network for detransitioners, and says she's been contacted by around 300 people.
I hadn't expected to have such a response to it, and I started being contacted by people who've been medically, surgically transitioned.
Charlie says they were mostly assigned female at birth and later identified as male. They view their detransition in different ways. Some are distressed, others are not. Although Charlie concedes she cannot verify their accounts, and it may be a biased sample.
Most of us are same-sex attracted. Most of us identify as either lesbian or bisexual. And a lot of us are autistic and tend to be under the age of about 25.
It's only anecdotal. But what are people in your support network telling you that they would have liked to have happened at the time they were making decisions to transition?
A lot of these young women feel that they were not in a state that they were able to give consent because they felt so unwell with eating disorders or depression, or this was going to be the thing that made them feel better. They often feel that they didn't follow up intensive therapy as much as they could have to make sure that it was really informed consent and the right path for them.
We don't know how many people detransition or for what reason. Experts we've spoken to say the research is limited and the existing studies are flawed. Some say around 2% detransition, others argue it's even lower. But the reality is we just don't know. It may be more, it may be less. There's no robust research about detransitioning, but having worked with transgender adults for more than a decade, psychotherapist James Caspian has now spoken to dozens of detransitioners. He has spotted some commonalities.
A lot of them will say they've spent a lot of time on social media where they've seen a lot of people who've transitioned, feeling it was very cool, feeling that it was a way to get away from being female. Quite a lot of them seem to have had a very negative experience of being female in a female body, sexual harassment, even abuse.
Debbie too believes she transitioned as a way of dealing with the sexual abuse she endured as a child. This is an extremely controversial area, Some fear detransition will be used as a weapon to deny trans people the care they need. Many groups working with the transgender community declined to take part in this film, but Mermaids, which has supported young people and their families for 25 years, agreed.
This idea that it is easy is in complete contrast to the experiences we hear every single day. You know, the process is rigorous, and the process is there to ensure that any decision made is the right one for that person. We mustn't use these experiences to suggest that everybody is being dealt with in a way that suggests they're being pressured or made into being trans. That's incorrect. You can't make someone be trans.
So how do people transition in the first place? Well, there are NHS specialist services for both children and adults. For young people questioning their gender identity, it's possible to take puberty-blocking drugs after an assessment, usually consisting of 3 to 6 sessions. Cross-sex hormones are only available from the age of 16, but many young people won't have physical intervention at all. In adult services, it's possible to get hormones after 1 or 2 appointments. Surgery is only allowed after taking hormones for at least a year.
This is an incredibly difficult field to work in, and the stakes are high. We've been told of a constant balancing of risk, the risk of not allowing a medical intervention and the distress that may cause, against the risk of beginning a journey that later may be regretted. All this against a backdrop of scientific uncertainty.
The Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS, is the only NHS clinic in England that treats under 18s questioning their gender identity. Anna Hutchinson was part of its senior team for 5 years.
I think one of the biggest dilemmas in this area is that the patient group are very sure of what they want from NHS England and from the professionals that they see, and many of them are very clear that they do want the medical intervention. The people for whom that pathway hasn't worked, in retrospect, will say that what they wished they had was therapy. So we've got a bit of a dilemma where perhaps what some of this patient group need may not be what they want at this time.
Young people struggling with their gender identity can also experience other difficulties and often need support from CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services.
So the specialist service is set up to see people specifically for gender dysphoria. They don't have the resources to work with any other presenting problems such as low mood or difficulties in the family. So they have to depend on local services to keep treating young people. But what we know is that over the past decade or so, CAMS have really been struggling with resources. So despite the best of intentions, sometimes the resources to help with the problems that are going alongside the gender dysphoria are not there.
Since Charlie went public with her support group, she's faced accusations that she was never really transgender and that she's anti-trans. At Manchester Pride this summer, she marched with a banner saying that gender ideology harms lesbians. She says she fears young lesbian girls are being misdiagnosed with gender dysphoria and placed on a medical pathway when they're actually gay.
There has absolutely been a backlash, but I think this comes from a place of fear and a bit of misunderstanding that what we're standing for. I'm not advocating detransition. I'm advocating for detransitioners. We've no intent to try to move people off of the path they've chosen.
However small the number of detransitioners may be, Anna Hutchinson says it's unquestionable that they need support.
The burden of treatment for people who are trans-identified is very significant. Even for those for whom it works, it might involve foregoing fertility, it will certainly involve, usually involves reliance on medication for the whole of your life and often surgery. Now, some people are more than happy to live with that burden of treatment because it works for them. However, there are a group for whom it won't work, and that creates a situation where there's almost a double burden, that they have to live with all of those changes that they've undergone, and it still hasn't helped alleviate their distress.
Debbie is now being seen by one of the NHS's gender identity clinics, but she says they're not sure how to help. She's also in touch with Charlie's support group, the Detransition Advocacy Network.
I think I'd have to wave a magic wand, but I hope my hair will grow back in time with the oestrogen. The body hair would reduce and I could get rid of this beard.
The subject of transgender healthcare is complex and emotive. It's clearly an area which needs much more scientific research and much more open and honest conversation to ensure a good quality of life for all concerned.
These are a really particularly isolated group of people. You know, they are the vulnerable group within the vulnerable group. And, you know, they're having to self-organise to find help and to seek treatment.
What's really, really important is to ensure that this experience isn't used to pressure other people. It shouldn't be used to tell those who are trans, those who are gender diverse, that they're wrong or different. It's about creating a system that makes everybody feel validated.
That was Deborah Cohen and Hannah Barnes with that report, and in a statement, NHS England told us every NHS service is led by clinicians based on patients' needs and informed by consideration of all available research, evidence, international standards and public consultation. All patients with gender dysphoria have extensive access to regular psychotherapy and counselling support, with a more detailed assessment process for those with complex physical or mental health problems. Adult patients are also required to live for at least a year in their desired gender before they become eligible for surgery. Well, Dr. Elizabeth Van Horn is a consultant psychiatrist in gender identity services at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust. Dr. Van Horn, we know many people transition without problem, but this film is about people like Charlie and Debbie who found that their decision to transition was a mistake. Your response?
Well, my response is that obviously on hearing about anybody who has transitioned and then feels that it has been a mistake, I'm obviously extremely sympathetic. I find that very, very distressing. As doctors and psychologists, we want to help our patients through their journey, not thwart them or put them at any more sort of disadvantage. But on the other hand, your piece actually showed this really well. This is a very tiny proportion of our patient population, and by saying that, I don't wish in any way to sort of limit the impact that it has on those particular individuals. But what we know from our population is that actually well less than 1% of our population choose to detransition.
Isn't that the point? That, as Deborah Cohen made clear, we don't know that number is small because we don't know the number. Many that we talked to just said they can't return to the Tavistock for whatever reason that is. And your duty of care presumably should be to find out how people are feeling, to find out what has happened afterwards, where there isn't the extensive medical research or evidence to take care of those people.
I wouldn't disagree with you at all, and I would actually encourage anybody who's in that situation to go and see their GP and to seek to get a referral back to a gender identity.
But it's not just about going back, is it? It is a concern that you're putting people on these pathways without enough evidence of the treatment or of the long-term consequences of what that treatment is doing. This can be life-changing treatment in many situations and circumstances, and that pathway is something that you're putting people on without the requisite evidence.
Well, I accept that we can always have a better evidence base. I don't accept that there is no evidence base. I think it depends on how you define your evidence base. And what I would add,
I
was just about to say that. The children's service at the Tavistock has been running for 30 years. They have seen more than 10,000 patients. The adult Charing Cross Gender Identity Service has been running for a year less than I am, which I think is 53 years. In that time, they've seen tens of thousands of patients. So there may not be the sort of gold standard, as we would say in medicine, randomised controlled trials, but actually you are rarely going to get... Sorry?
Well, I'm just curious, because the NHS is meant to be dispassionate, isn't it? It is for people to have faith in all treatments, whether it is a disease, a cancer, an asthma, or a gender reassignment. It has to be peer-reviewed. It has to be evidence-based research. It's not enough to say we fail to be clinically curious or acquire the relevant data and evidence that we need to make sure this is right.
I think that's both harsh and inaccurate, actually. I think a lot of research has gone on over the years. I think that it's quite difficult to do very long-term research in any field. And if you're looking at people's reactions to transitioning, and you're looking at what happens 5, 10, 15, 20 years, very few studies will ever be set up that will actually take that into consideration. If you look at the hang on, let me just ask you about the numbers, okay? Because the numbers are astonishing, that we know that in the last 4 years, the number of adults and children being referred to gender identity clinics has more than doubled. It's now at 8,000. Now, what do you attribute that to? I don't know. I don't think any of us know.
But why aren't you finding out? You can't just say, I don't know and we're not looking into it.
I didn't say that. I said we don't know.
Well, are you looking into it?
And we probably won't know until some time has passed. I think you have to be realistic about what people are capable of achieving. So, it's all very well for people to cast aspersion and opinion, but we are faced in a day-to-day...
Are you looking into it? A really simple question.
Please.
Are you looking into it?
We are faced in a day-to-day situation with extremely distressed people coming to us, and we are trying to give them the best healthcare that we can.
Of course, and when you have people coming through your door, you need to have the research to understand why
So are you looking into it? Can you explain, for example, why more than 75% of those referred to you are assigned female at birth? Do you know that?
No, not yet, we don't, no.
So in that gap between not knowing and not doing the research...
And equally, Emily, prior to that, we didn't know why the majority of people that were being referred to our service were assigned male at birth. So something has shifted, you know.
But you are the NHS. If you do not understand the cause, how can you direct people on the right path when this could be a life-changing moment? I mean, is it enough to say, we don't know, and actually there is no body of research I can point to that is investigating this, we're dealing with whoever comes in the door?
Well, no, I think that is a bit disingenuous, actually. I mean, I think, you know, gender services have now been operating since the 1960s. It's been a very difficult field to even get clinical provision for due to various issues around stigma and prejudice. That is now thankfully changing. It's been a very difficult area in which to do research for a whole variety of reasons, of which that's one of them. And there is also, I think, a wealth of clinical expertise that's evolved. And I think, you know, it's very easy to put all your faith into what I would describe as quantitative research, but actually there is a wealth of qualitative research, you know, that has gone on in terms of clinical expertise and experience. And the majority...
But you heard it's not enough. When you hear gender dysphoria can often be part, or sometimes be part, of a complex web of issues, isn't it really important how you untangle those issues so that you don't actually say, oh, we can't start looking at quantitative results, we can't start looking at numbers. These are numbers that you have to look at because they...
I'm not saying for a moment that we're not going to look at quantitative numbers. We're
not going to look at, but these numbers are here, they're in front of you, and I can't see you telling me that you're looking at data or you're looking at research now that is actually going to try and help you put these people on the right path for them. That's what's missing.
Well, I think you've misunderstood me, in which case I apologise if anything I've said has led you to misunderstand me, because I think we are constantly, as a service, reviewing our processes, taking into consideration feedback, and we are constantly developing our service. And I think that's one thing that has happened, for example, recently in the Children and Young Person Service, is that there's been some feedback that makes that service think that maybe they should delay the age that people have access to puberty blockers from. So, you know, it's a dynamic process. We don't have all the answers. We try very hard, as much as anyone can. But I think at the end of the day, what people have to understand is that the people that come to us don't not have a problem to begin with. So it's not a question of do no harm. It's a question of how to mitigate that harm as best as you can in a very, very difficult circumstance.
Elizabeth Horn, thank you. Thanks very much for coming in.